Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. In the last podcast, we talked about using your 3-year-old or inferior cognitive function to build a strong foundation upon which the rest of your character sits on top. And that doesn't mean necessarily putting a bunch of time and effort into developing that cognitive function, that inferior or 3-year-old function. But it does mean acknowledging that there are elements that you have to make peace with. And we highly recommend you go check it out if you haven't already. This is part 2. In the first one, in part 1, we talked about the perceiving functions. And perceiving functions in some ways are a little easier and they're a little more difficult. They're more difficult because they tend to be more abstract, right? And they tend to be a little bit more malleable in how they show up. But they're also easier because they come with a lot less expectations, a lot less should statements about how the world works. We can make peace with those parts of ourselves a little easier because they don't necessarily represent our value statements. We're going to talk about the judging functions or the decision-making functions in this part 2 of the podcast. And this is where things can get a little bit more difficult because this is where the hard truths live. This is where questions like what my character are and what is the quality of person that I am. And so oftentimes when we have to make peace with a judging or decision-making inferior function, and this kind of goes for those of us who have it as a 10-year-old in tertiary too, it just looks a little different. But when we're making peace with a decision-making or judging function that is less sophisticated, we can kind of mess ourselves up a little bit. This is where a lot of red flags live. So last week, it was a little bit more abstract and conceptual. This week, it'll still be a little conceptual, but it might be a little tougher messaging than the previous podcast. Now, the theme, I don't know if we really hit this home, but I think after we recorded it, I realized that the theme of the perceiving functions was all about regret, right? Like not building the life you want to live, getting to the end of your life and regretting the decisions you didn't make, or, letting time go by because you're sort of stuck in a rut, or you're stuck in your head, or you're not thinking of consequences, or you can't establish any sort of traction. The big pattern of the perceiving functions as an inferior 3-year-old, foundation was all about regret. This time we're talking more about admitting things to yourself. The judging functions are more about admitting something that you've been pushing away, that actually, again, refers more to the quality of your character than it does to just simply about living a life that you end up regretting.
When you say quality of character, that sounds a little ominous, like this is going to lead to the quality of your character. But you don't mean it doesn't mean that there be dragons there all the time. What you're saying is that the foundation of who you are can live here fundamentally, and this is a building block for other parts of yourself to shine. So if this part's corrupt, or if you're not giving it attention, it could lead to lack of character in yourself. But what you're really talking about is more a building block to have good character, not that this is a got you conversation.
Right. It's not like somehow EPs and IJs have a leg up in this. Like EPs and IJs that lead with a perceiving function are more likely to regret their life choices. EJs and IPs, who we're going to be addressing in this podcast, it's more about making peace with hard truths, right? That tends to be the challenge. And there's not one that's better or worse. And yeah, you're right. I mean, that probably did sound really ominous about the character thing, but it's more about acknowledging that there are evaluations that need a little bit of integration into your life. There are other ways of looking at things that need to be integrated in order for you to get your ultimate, the ultimate desire of your dominant or driver function accomplished.
All of these personality types that have a judging function at the 3-year-old or inferior place lead with a judging function. So they're all leading with a decision-making or judging function, meaning there's a lot of clarity in what should be done in the world. Often, for people of these types, They have a assured sense of themselves. They're not as open maybe as people that lead with perceiving functions. So there's this assuredness, and I think there's a little bit more tendency to turn off that 3-year-old or inferior process because those should statements might conflict with your primary driver should statements. So I think this is why we're focusing on this, just to frame it for you. You might have a little more challenge to massage and play with this and get in there because it might be a little more threatening for you because you're a little bit more sure of yourself about how things should be. That's your driver process, right? The should statements of your life.
Exactly. Okay, so let's start with EJs that lead with extroverted judging functions. So this would be extroverted thinking or effectiveness or extroverted feeling harmony. And let's start with ETJs. ETJs, ESTJs, and ENTJs both lead with extroverted thinking or effectiveness. And that means their 3-year-old or inferior function is introverted feeling or authenticity. And so what do you need to have as a firm foundation of introverted feeling or authenticity in order to build the rest of your structure upon?
A great way to quickly look at this is to see what's missing here. What isn't in place as a foundation for you potentially in your introverted feeling? What do you need to admit to yourself that you need here to build a good foundation for your life? So what admission do you need to make for yourself at this 3-year-old or inferior level? So for introverted feeling, it's all about getting in touch with your core values, your inner motivation, the personal effect on yourself as a person and other people, individuals. And if this is missing from you as an extroverted thinking driver or effectiveness driver, you're going to have a hard time understanding your own character. Where are your core values and what kind of character do you bring to the world? So, and the pathway to that character is by sitting with difficult emotions, sitting with difficult core values, what's meaningful to you personally. And it's often very easy to overlook those personal core values because you're looking with that effectiveness process as a driver, you're looking to execute things in the outer world. You're looking to make things happen, and personal feelings often get in the way of making things happen in the outer world. If we had to stop for everybody's personal feelings, we'd never accomplish anything. So you almost want to bulldoze over even your own personal feelings to accomplish things. So admitting to yourself that difficult emotions, sitting with the heavy, deeper, maybe darker emotions, maybe just more nuanced emotions of how you really feel about something, can lead to building great character as a foundation. But that can be a challenge for you as an ETJ.
Oftentimes, I think this looks like needing healing. Like, do you have healing work that has gone undone? And are you pushing it away? So as a 3-year-old or inferior function, the healthier your emotions are. Like, again, you don't, just like we were talking about in the first podcast, you don't have to go do a bunch of work in introverted feeling or authenticity. You don't have to like go be an artist or go get into, deep emotional expression or whatever, but just attending to the health of your emotional state is something that is a massive leverage point. Building an entire character on top of something that is it unexpressed or ignored trauma creates a house of cards. And so a really firm foundation for an ETJ is to just go in and check to see, is there healing work that needs to be done? Is there stuff that you feel a lot of pain around, a lot of wounding, something maybe from your past or your childhood or something that's going on right now that you're ignoring or neglecting? Is there something that you have convinced yourself you can make peace with, but really actually needs some attention? And maybe there are some wounds that need dressing. And you don't have to necessarily do this yourself. I mean, one of the nice things about being in the modern world is that we are so much more in touch with the need for, like mental health issues right now is something that I see all the time, making sure that you're attending to mental health issues. And now mental health, I think, has really expanded in definition away from people who have disorders to just like a general sense of mental hygiene, like general emotional and mental hygiene, which is do the things that are good for your soul, do the things that are good for your spirit. So getting into that place can be, of course, a challenge for an ETJ because that is a vulnerable place that is not in their sandbox. There's not a lot of control there. When you go inside, you express how you express. Your emotions are your emotions. They just are what they are. And sometimes they make you feel out of control. They make you feel like you are, that maybe you're, childlike. If you feel a lot of unexpressed anger, they can put you into a place of a lot of, emotions that are embarrassing if you express a lot of anger to other people and you didn't feel like you could control it in front of them. So it's a really vulnerable place. There are contexts that you can express some of those emotions that are safe places to do that. You can talk to therapists, you can talk to counselors, and and there's a wide range of help you can get, or not help, but like assistance you can get for those spaces. But once you have an access point to those things, then you can really be in touch with your character, your sense of ethics and morality, how you treat other people. If you aren't in touch with that part of you, if you don't have a strong foundation in that 3-year-old or inferior, then oftentimes there's a sense of harshness with other people. Like everybody should just be getting over it. Whatever they're dealing with, they should just be able to get over whatever's going on for them. If you have gone through the process of healing yourself, you have a little bit more finger on the pulse of what that looks like. And you oftentimes have a little bit more generosity to share for people who are in tougher situations.
You can't outsource this. If you're an ETJ, your temptation is to outsource everything you can possibly outsource. This is one area where you can have assistance, someone like a therapist or someone close to you you can talk to express some things from your emotions. But there is no way to outsource this part of yourself. You have to be the one to attend to it. And I think that's one of the greatest challenges. And when you're building a foundation for your life in this area, you have to realize this is a hands-on process. It's internal, it's personal, it's subjective. It might be a little scary, a little bit unnerving. You might feel a little insecure here, but you have to do the work personally. It's a personal process that applies to you as an individual. And so it's going to conflict with everything you know to be true in your life. All the things you've outsourced, all the systems you put out there outside of yourself to run automatically or with very little input, it's not going to work like that for you. And so this is going to be the challenge for you to get into that impersonal, dig your actual hands into the mud of the emotions of your life. You got to hold them, touch them. You got to be there with them. And that's going to be your biggest challenge to build this foundation as an ETJ.
Giving yourself a little bit of time and recognizing that the process requires patience with yourself. It also means being patient with people in your life and allowing them to be patient with you. There's a lot that's to this. And oftentimes the very beginning is to just start journaling how you feel about stuff. It doesn't have to be super deep. Again, you don't have to go be an interpretive dancer or whatever. Like this is not complex, intricate work necessarily. It can be simple. And you just need an access point to get into how you're feeling about things. And then as that unfurls, if you do notice that you have some wounding that is beyond your capacity to dress yourself, then while you can't outsource the work, you can get assistance for that, again, with like, counselors and therapists and other people in those professions. But again, that strong foundation, that 3-year-old or inferior function, if you build your whole structure of who you are on a foundation of a very healthy introverted feeling or authenticity function, then when you are creating impact in the outside world, there's no discomfort with that impact. There's no sense that you might be offending your own conscience as you're building something in the outside world because you're keeping track of that. You've learned that, and it builds on itself, right? It's like a self-reinforcing check and balance system of going, it's cool that I'm making this impact because I don't have to fear that I'm offending my own values as I'm doing it because I'm already keeping track of that. Okay, so let's go over to the other EJ types, the EFJs. So these would be ENFJs and ESFJs that lead with extroverted feeling or harmony. So the 3-year-old or inferior function is introverted thinking or accuracy.
So remember, EFJs are leading with that harmony process. It's focused on getting the needs met of people in their lives. So if you're an EFJ, you're probably very attentive to the needs of people in your life. You're also attentive to how people connect, the social dynamics and connections. And what's interesting to you are the social truths, the unspoken social contracts, quite frankly, that we all share. And so on the other side of that polarity, at the 3-year-old or inferior place, when we're talking about introverted thinking, these are the hard truths. These aren't the social truths. These aren't consensus truths. These are hard truths, quite frankly, from yourself. These are hard personal truths that are your own, very similar to ETJs. They're looking at maybe the personal feelings and the deep emotions they have. These are the hard truths, or the deeper truths that you have, the things that are true about you, regardless of what the people out there say. About all of the crowd, they might say this is a truth, but you have a truth inside of yourself that's your own. And sometimes it's easy to ignore that, or overlook it, or suppress it, and not have a good foundation of your personal truth because you want to be so connected to the people in the outer world that sometimes you don't allow those truths to be said out loud, or even to yourself quietly or personally. So when we talk about admitting things, for you as an introverted thinking user, when you are using it as your 3-year-old or inferior, as an EFJ, we're talking about admitting hard data leading to truth, personal truth, and creating integrity in your life. So the foundation we're creating here is integrity. Just like on the FI side, or introverted feeling, we're creating character. Here we're creating character also, but it's through integrity of thought, integrity of truth. And that will only come if you're willing to look at the hard data, the hard facts about what really is leading to that truth and that integrity you can build for yourself as a foundation.
This can go one of two ways often. I've noticed that for EFJs who don't have a strong foundation of their 3-year-old or inferior function, it can either go with actually living a lie. Like their life is a lie, and they will not admit it to themselves because they don't want to destroy the relationships around them. So what does it mean to live a lie? It means that you're not in the right place, you're not in the right paradigm, you're not with the right people, you're something is just really off. And you're having a hard time acknowledging or admitting that to yourself, because it means that you would have to make a bunch of changes that would cause a lot of relationship havoc. So that's probably the most extreme case is an EFJ living a lie. But I've also seen EFJs that almost are too gentle. They don't like hard data that make them have to do things that hurt other people. And I'm about to say something that may alienate a percentage of our audience, and my apologies if we do. I am an introverted thinking person, so I'm just going to say the things that make sense to me, and we'll see how it pans out.
Please still love Antonia, even if this makes you mad, whatever you're about to say. I'm just giving a disclaimer.
So you may have a lot of reasons. If you are a person who is against vaccinations in children, you might have a lot of reasons why you feel like children shouldn't be vaccinated. But I have noticed that one of the reasons why, right, it might not be the complete reason, but one of the reasons why is because people are uncomfortable sticking their children with needles. They just don't like having to take their child to a doctor and watch their kid get poked with a bunch of needles and cry, and it's painful and it's traumatic, and they just don't like that. And so a part of the reason why they avoid that process and may look for reasons why that is not necessary is because it's just really awful and traumatic to go through that for not just their kid, but for them to watch it happen. I'm not saying that you have absolutely zero reason to feel the way that you feel and that you have no data to back it up. I personally feel like vaccinations are a very good thing, and that's my personal opinion. But I have noticed that this may be one of those reasons. And I'm going to use this illustratively, by the way. This is not a conversation about vaccinations. And I'm going to use that as an illustration for the tendency that people with extroverted feeling or harmony as their driver function, if something is painful, they will shield other people from it. So it might not be their own personal truth. It might be just something that is a truth about reality, something that needs to happen or something that somebody needs to hear, that they will shield that person from because they don't want that person to go through the pain of experiencing it. And so part of the integrity that comes from that strong foundation of the 3-year-old or inferior function is that people need some grit, right? We need to go through painful processes. We need to hear things that we don't want to hear. We need to go through actions that hurt us. These things make us resilient people. And we are better prepared for the world when we have some harshness that we have navigated through, because it builds grit in humans. So having a strong foundation of introverted thinking or accuracy as that 3-year-old function is twofold. On one side, it's having it's making sure that you're living your personal truth, right? It's making sure that you're not allowing yourself to be in a situation that there's a part of you that's whispering to you all the time is just wrong, right? It's wrong for you and you should be getting out. That's on one side. The other side is having the resilience and grit yourself to allow people in your life to go through painful situations and experiences, so that all of us can step up to do our duty, to do the things that we need to do to get through tough times, to be people of grit and resilience. And if you have that strong, foundation, then the thing that extroverted feeling or harmony really wants to do is take care of people, to make sure that everybody has their needs met. And one of those needs is resilience. So I think when an EFJ really has that strong foundation, they're building that character on that strong foundation, then I'm not saying they're rude or mean. I'm not saying that they'll do bad things to other people to build that resilience, but they won't shield themselves or others from uncomfortable situations in an effort to avoid pain. They understand that pain is a part of life, and that it's a matter of helping each other get through pain, not helping each other avoid pain.
Because hard truths might be challenging for you as an EFJ to find or locate. Again, this is your 3-year-old process. You're good at people. People are what you shine at, focusing on. So what I would do for an access point for you if you're an EFJ is look at the relationships in your life and really get truthful with yourself around which of those relationships have codependent tendencies. Like which ones are maybe codependent or becoming codependent. Focus on those. And basically a codependent relationship is you not being willing to call a truth about the dynamic of that relationship because you're worried that that truth will disrupt the connection you have with that person. So you're actually hiding truths from maybe your spouse, a friend, a parent, a relative, somebody that you know, because you're worried that if that truth comes out about how you actually think about it, they're not going to want to be in relationship with you, or maybe you won't want to be in relationship with them. So you're worried it will disrupt the connection you have. So I would recommend you look and see, are there relationships that I've allowed to become codependent or are in the process of becoming codependent? That is a great access point and focus for you as an EFJ.
I think to piggyback off of that, another great tool is going from the drama triangle to the empowerment dynamic.
Yes.
So getting honest with yourself if you think that you are a hero, if you have a tendency to save people, or if you are either of the other two parts of that. But I think just like when an ETJ can get assistance through, a therapist or a counselor, you can do the same, right? If you feel like you maybe need a little bit of high, work in this, there can also be some emotional and mental hygiene work that's done in this inferior function as well, or 3-year-old function as well. So getting some assistance, but those might be some access points of asking, because like you mentioned, Joel, EFJs are great at relationships. So use the access point of the quality of their relationships and what they look like to maybe have some of those come to Jesus moments. And if you are in those situations and you're unsure of how to navigate out, or you need some assistance, once again, that's what therapists and counselors are for.
So moving over to the IP types, let's start with the IFPs. Your 3-year-old inferior foundation is going to be extroverted thinking effectiveness. It's about getting things done in the outer world. It's about accomplishing tasks, and this is something that you necessarily don't see, clearly. It's something that's your inferior 3-year-old. So it's not going to be something you're interested in. It might be like a little bit like, oh man, that doesn't feel good to me to have to maybe put my own personal feelings aside to execute on something in the outer world or make it happen. So there's some admission here for you. As you're working through, you might have to admit that things are beyond just your ability to do them yourself. You might have to work with other people or complex systems or longer timelines to make impact or accomplish something, to make impact in the outer world and make things happen. It takes coordination, and that admission of coordination, outside coordination from yourself, that might be really difficult for you. And if you can discover how this underpins your personality, now you're able to make a lot of impact in the outer world. IFPs who have a sense that there's more going on than just they can handle themselves, they need that complex coordination outside themselves to make stuff happen, and they rest into that, they can get a lot done. They can make a lot of projects happen. They can make a lot of impact. A business can be built. Art can be created. All kinds of accomplishments can open up to you as an IFP. And this is really exciting with that foundation in place. Again, though, that introverted feeling is going to be all about what you feel, right? So it's going to be hard to see this because it may not feel good to do some of these things. It may not feel right sometimes to do these things. And so that's going to be a little bit of a blind spot. That should statement blinds you from that 3-year-old. But herein lies the power of building that foundation for yourself.
A lot of times there seems to be a contradiction between the values or the ethics a person will develop in their introverted feeling or authenticity function as a driver that seem to be directly contradictory with the messages they get from the world of how a person effectively accomplishes things. Like extroverted thinking or effectiveness is about building stuff, right, in the outside world. It's about basically having an impact and getting things done. And IFPs, even if they, for some reason have a sense of morality or ethics against, I don't know, let's say it's making money, right? They think making money is bad or wrong. I don't know an IFP that doesn't want to make a mark, right? That's usually what it is that they want the world to know who they are. They want their inner exploration, that introspection, the understanding of the depth of who they are and what they understand about humanity. They don't want that to get lost inside of themselves. They don't want that to die with them. And so there's a desire to make a mark on the world and have some of that complexity of who they are be expressed in the outside world. They cannot do that, though, if you're constantly rejecting this idea of needing to build something to have value as a person. It's like the wrong way of looking at it. It's not about having value because you've built something. It's about building something so that other people can get to know who you are as an interface. So a strong foundation of that 3-year-old extroverted thinking or effectiveness is about making your mark. It's about understanding that there's complex systems out there, infrastructure that's built to actually facilitate people getting to know your deep inner expression. There are entire industries that are built around artistic expression. There's entire industries built around craftsmanship and all sorts of things that can facilitate you expressing who you are. So instead of rejecting that part of who you are, having a strong foundation, and that means playing nice with others. Right? It means not just going, well, I'm not going to be a part of that because that's all that other people value. It's about integrating the requirement of plugging yourself into something that's a complex, system in order for people to get to know you as a complex system. I think a sign that an IFP is rejecting this part of who they are is the idea that they have to do everything themselves. And they almost get a little controlling, right? Like if they can't be in control of all of it from the top to the bottom, they don't want to play along, right? They have to have control of everything and everything. Every part of the system has to have their mark on it. And there is a little bit of understanding about that if a person is an artist and that they feel like this is a reflection of who they are. But not absolutely every single element of something needs to have your controlling mark on it. You can have influence over it, especially if you're an artist and you feel that this is a reflection of you. But there are a lot of things that are part of these complex systems that can be built that are that you can be hands off on and trust and lean into other people that they can help make this happen as well. And also, this is making the assumption that you're at the top. A lot of times you have to work your way up, and an IFP with a healthy foundation, like a healthy foundational 3-year-old of effectiveness, recognizes that working your way up is not a humiliation. Working your way up is part of how you gain more and more experience and understanding and awareness of who you need to be once you get to the top. So this idea of going from 0 to 60, automatically you're such an amazing person, and maybe you've gone to school for this and this was your education, so you should immediately be able to be whatever it is that you think that, that your strengths or talents are in, that you should instantly be given a job in, I don't know, being a creative writer or being an artist of some sort, means that you are actually not understanding the linear progression of becoming the best version of that artistic expression. Extroverted thinking or effectiveness understands that A goes to B, goes to C, goes to D. And a part of becoming the best is going through all of those elements of working your way through and gaining better and better chops. So a strong foundation will actually help you grow into that position and be qualified once you get there.
It's this idea of career capital, building things over time, collecting skills, resources, and going through the timeline on your pathway to success. And I think that's a great access point to think about that. As you're building a foundation, that capital you're building, career capital, social capital, whatever these external, systems, that extroverted thinking parts of yourself, that foundation really allows you to have that success in your life. So that's building a strong foundation for that effectiveness 3-year-old that ISFPs and INFPs will use. If we go over to the INTPs and ISTPs, they're going to be using a 3-year-old process of extroverted feeling, harmony as their 3-year-old. Again, this is about social rules, unspoken social contracts, connection, creating harmony with people, and the interface with other people in the outer world. If this is your 3-year-old, it's easy to maybe marginalize it, forget it's there, not want to look at it. Again, as an ITP, there be dragons there, man, and the world is a very social world. You have to interface with people in most of life. It's very rare that anyone lives a life without having to interface with anybody else. And so this part of you probably gets stretched a lot. You have to go and you have maybe things that challenge you here, make you feel insecure. And it can be very easy to just run toward the hard truths and the data of introverted thinking or accuracy as your driver and ignore this part of you. But this part of you is a great foundation. It's our assumption that you as an ITP want connection with other people. Now, maybe you don't want to connect with the crowd, the collective out there, quote unquote. But there are people in your life you want to connect with, you want to vibe with, you want to have a good relationship with them. And so if you have a good foundation at this part of yourself, you're going to be able to have those connections and those deep, resonant relationships with other people. But it requires you to build that foundation, an admission that you care about the approval of other people to create that connection. Like people's approval of you, and approval maybe feel like a harsh word to you, maybe like, well, I don't care about anybody's approval. But it's this idea that the approval could also be looked at as like the vibe between two people. That's like approval almost sounds real judgmental, but it could just be the vibe between you and another person. You actually care about that vibe between you and another person, that unspoken, emotional, non-data vibe between two entities. You care about that because it leads to the connection that you want in your life. And admitting that is the first step to starting to build that strong foundation for yourself for those relationships.
Most of the time when an ITP says they don't care about other people's opinion of them, it's a defensive position, right? There's a sense that they can't get it, so they didn't want it to begin with. But I think all TPs, I'm going to speak as a fellow TP. I'm an ENTP, but I'm going to kind of acknowledge that there's some crossover here. All TPs want a group of friends that love and care about them. We all want that connection. And so the idea that we don't care about other people's approval means that we don't care about, like you said, that connection with other people. And that's just not true. That's a defensive strategy. All ITPs would love to have other people value them the way the ITP values themselves. Here's one of the challenges. When you have introverted thinking or accuracy as your dominant or driver function, oftentimes people will accuse you of being arrogant. Like you have a struggle with humility. And the reason why is because if you see something positive in yourself, you have no reason to not believe that. You don't pretend for social reasons that you're not good at something if you actually are good at it. You don't have this false modesty that a lot of people believe you should have because that's quote unquote being humble. And so when you have high value for yourself, it's confusing why other people don't have value for you. And so then you think everybody else is an idiot. Like they should be able to see how valuable I am and I bring value. But just because I can't seem to figure out this social interfacing thing doesn't mean that I don't come with a bunch of skills and gifts. So why aren't other people seeing this about me? And so a ITP that has a strong foundation of extroverted feeling or harmony 3-year-old is somebody that finally understands that people don't care about how awesome you are until you can show respect for their emotional experience. Once you start showing respect for their emotional experience, then it means that you won't just cut off that rapport. You have a little bit more of a sensitivity to other people wanting to feel good in your presence. You don't just act like everybody else is an idiot. You don't get mad at them or resent them because you don't have this higher up as a skill. You take it upon yourself to increase your emotional intelligence, and you take it upon yourself to be the person who greases more social wheels, as opposed to being a person who disrupts social interfacing or disrupts that vibe or energetic dynamic and then blames other people for not seeing how awesome you are, and you should be able to do that. So I think that strong foundation of the 3-year-old function or the 3-year-old position is being more sensitive to other people's emotional experience. And then as you do that, you do end up getting friends. You do end up getting more and more friendships and connection and intimacy. And then you don't have to pretend you didn't care to begin with. You fully acknowledge. That's the thing that ITPs have to admit. They have to admit that they actually do care whether or not they have friends. They actually do care whether or not people respect them. And they do care whether or not they're valued for the things that they value themselves for.
When I was talking about EFJs using harmony as a driver, I talked to you EFJs and said, you're good at relationships. So use that as an access point to find relationships where maybe truth isn't being spoken. If you're an ITP, you as an introverted thinking accuracy driver have a knack for noticing absurdities in the world. Because you're watching for incongruities in yourself and others, things are absurd. The world is absurd. And so tap into the absurdity that is extroverted feeling at your 3-year-old or inferior level. Tap into the absurdity that the vibe between people matters more than the data between people. That's absurd. That's insane to you maybe. It's like, what? Come on, that's just silly. Why would a social truth matter more than a real truth? That's absurd. Well, you're good at absurdities. So tap into that as an access point to find how the absurdity isn't that absurd after all. Does that make sense? It's almost like using your strength to find ways to access that absurdity, the extroverted feeling process.
Yeah, in the sense that something that's absurd doesn't have to be resented. It can be actually seen as humorous.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's actually kind of funny that everybody else got the memo and we never did. I mean, it's painful, and through most of your life, it's a lot of pain, but it's actually kind of funny. It's funny to be, and I'm going to say this, and I hope other types understand what I'm saying here, but it's funny to be so smart and so dumb at the same time. And I say that as a fellow TP. We're so smart and so dumb simultaneously. That's absurd. It's kind of funny. So finding almost the humor in all of it. And I think that's one of the things that is an example of an ITP that has a good foundation in their 3-year-old or inferior function, is that they have a really good sense of humor.
Yeah.
And most people are attracted to their sense of humor, that they're attracted to the fact that they're a little awkward, but it's all awkwardness and good spirits and good humor. And I think recognizing that need for connection, that need for interchange, and the spirit of never giving up on it, of being resilient. We were talking about how sometimes EFJs need the message that people need to be resilient. ITPs oftentimes understand that. We understand that the world can be harsh and we need some resilience. And this is one of the ways that ITPs need to build that resilience, is to not stop trying to connect with other people. And when they do, oftentimes you can figure it out. You are smart people. You can navigate through it. You can do the test iterate you need to do in order to figure out the emotional intelligence, that introspective emotional intelligence, to be able to form those relationships. And having just a few close, good friendships that feed that part of who you are is enough to buoy the rest of it, so that you have a generous opinion about humanity. Like that's really the foundation. The foundational component is a generous opinion of humanity and a desire to help people, a desire to give back and to do well for other people. And oftentimes that's done by teaching them cool stuff. It's by sharing the way that you think in order to move the needle. And by doing that, then you are able to get those thoughts transferred. You're able to figure out ways to interface with others so that they understand how you're thinking.
Yeah, and when you bring your thoughts and the data transfer that happens after the vibe happens, you get to share truth. That can be very rewarding for you as an ITP. That can feel really good to have that intimacy, to be able to share those truths. So we've been talking about the judging functions, all 4 of the judging functions at the 3-year-old or inferior place in personality. We've been talking about EJs and IPs that have these there. And the access points, the ways to maybe think about these, is we're building a foundation for your personality as we talk about these things that, if they're not there, can maybe cause some challenges for you in your life. If you don't have a good foundation at this 3-year-old level, even with the perceiving functions we talked about on the last episode, you can maybe struggle a little bit. So these aren't, again, things we're suggesting you go out and work on actively right now. These are things to just be thinking about as you're in your personality development. We still maintain that one of the strongest places to focus, especially early on, is that co-pilot, to develop it. Find exercises and resources, which we have many of here at Personality Hacker, that can help you focus on growing that. And this inferior process is still something that is a great foundation for success in your life. Don't ignore it completely. Don't think it's unimportant. It's just not something we start with when we give you advice, but it's still very important for the foundation of your life.
And to piggyback off what you just said, if you do choose to work on it right now, we recommend that you find the leverage points of what we've been talking about, as opposed to feeling like you have to pour a bunch of time and effort into developing it. If you're an ITP, you don't have to become, quote unquote, an EFJ. If you're an ETJ, you don't have to, quote unquote, become an IFP. Don't pour a ton of resource into developing this inferior 3-year-old function, but find the leverage points of making sure that you have it that as a strong foundation, so that it's not able to interrupt all the work you do with the rest of your functions.
All right. So you've been here with us for this conversation and last week's conversation. What is building for you in your mind, in your heart? What's coming up for you? What questions, comments, what stories do you have to share? You haven't had a microphone for this conversation, but we want to hear from you. Go over to personalityhacker.com. You can leave a comment, ask a question, or share your story directly below this podcast. Let's get a conversation started around some of these concepts and ideas, and let's start sharing those with each other as we start to think about the foundations we're building at our 3-year-old process.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. We have a whole suite of really great programs. If you want to go check them out at personalityhacker.com under our program catalog, see if there's one right for you. We have a lot of personal growth-oriented programs that we highly recommend. And we have one for each personality type called the Personality Development Starter Kit that we know is going to be a game changer for you. We also have our book called Personality Hacker. You can get it at Amazon, Books A Million, all major retailers. If you leave us a rating and review for the book on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.